Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's live astronomy program. My name is Justin. I'm happy to be your guide today. I'm one of the astronomers here at the Science Museum of Virginia. If you're just watching one of these shows for the first time, welcome to the show. You picked a good one this week. There have been a few things happening in the news. If you've watched previous episodes, welcome back. If you would like to catch up on episodes you may have missed, remember previous shows, I think we have 17 of them in the archive now. They're all available right here on Facebook in our video section. A few notes before we get started. As always, I want to thank our sponsors for this series, Allianz Partners. Happy to have them aboard once again this week. For the rest of the show, I'm going to be using software just like the ones we use here at the museum up in the Dome Theater. It's planetarium software called Digistar. So we'll be able to see some pretty cool stuff. That means if you are able to watch on a nice big screen, a second monitor, at least make it full screen on your phone, you'll have a little bit better experience. We're going to see some pretty interesting stuff today. So let me actually get you let you get set up on Digistar here. I'm going to switch over to well, our starting point for today's show. As soon as I tuned in to a press conference on Monday, I knew what today's show was going to be all about. Maybe you heard the story about Venus this week. Now, a few weeks ago, I talked about how we found life all over the place here on Earth. On the globe you're watching now, those little markers all indicate different, unusual environments, extreme locations where life has been found here on Earth. It's mostly little microbes, bacteria, things like that. But we know here on Earth, life can exist in highly acidic environments, very salty environments, very hot and very cold environments. You know, maybe if we're going to look for life elsewhere in the solar system, we shouldn't just focus on shirt sleeve environments like we have on most of our planet. It's okay to consider places where temperature is a little more extreme or the chemistry is a little bit different. So maybe when you heard about the possibility of life on Venus, it shouldn't have struck you as such a surprise. It's kind of an old idea, but what happened this week? Well, astronomers announced the discovery of a gas called phosphine in the atmosphere of Venus. Here on Earth, if you're familiar with phosphine at all, it's probably because it is a very toxic substance. It's not good for humans and most other life here on Earth, but we think it can be produced by some bacteria that live in oxygen-free environments. That's one of those extreme environments where life is possible here on Earth. If it's produced by life here on Earth, could it be produced by life in the atmosphere of Venus? Well, sure, it's a possibility, and the atmosphere would be the place to live if you're going to live on Venus. You may recall that the surface of Venus is the hottest of any world in the entire solar system. The atmosphere of Venus is almost completely devoid of water. There's definitely no water on the surface either. The atmosphere is very acidic. It's almost entirely acid. There are acid clouds and acid rain on Venus. It actually breaks the pH scale that we use here on Earth. It is such an acidic environment. So maybe not the best place to carve out a living. And yet, up in the atmosphere, in the clouds, there is a place where temperatures are a little bit lower. The air pressure is actually very similar to what we experience here on Earth, and that's where that phosphine gas was detected. And if it is being produced by Venusian microbes, that's where they would have to live. We'll probably circle back to that at the end of the show. Let's take a look at why maybe we should give this discovery a little extra thought. Ideally, the signal that astronomers announced this week would be confirmed maybe at a different telescope or in a different part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Just some kind of confirmation would be nice. There are missions already scheduled to fly to Venus in the coming years, and perhaps more will be added after this discovery. So maybe actually having a spacecraft explore the atmosphere in a little more detail, confirm the phosphine is there, or maybe even confirm life is there directly would be helpful. Until then, we should probably be a little bit skeptical of the claims of life on Venus, simply because scientists have been burned before. And to be clear, the team that announced this discovery is only claiming to have found the gas, but it does open up the possibility of life. So let's talk about some of these previous cases in history where there's been signs that maybe something could be happening that could be due to life, but it didn't turn out to be the case. So let's start with perhaps a more obvious destination. I guess in a sense now, those scientists studying Venus are in a race with scientists that are studying Mars to find evidence of life on one of our neighboring planets. So let's catch up with the search for life on Mars. At the very end of July, actually talked about the launch of a new spacecraft, NASA's Perseverance rover. It is on the way to Mars right now. That's what the spacecraft looks like in space, and it will arrive at the red planet in February. So we've got a few months to wait until it gets there. But when it does arrive, Perseverance is going to directly search for maybe fossilized life forms or other clues that biology has been active on Mars at some point in the planet's past. But what if we didn't have to send a spacecraft to Mars to make those kinds of discoveries? What if we could just wait for a little piece of Mars to come to us? That actually happens from time to time. We found tens of thousands of meteorites here on Earth. Little space rocks have entered Earth's atmosphere and can be studied by scientists. Now, out of those tens of thousands, we found a couple hundred that have the right chemical makeup and have actually little pockets of gas trapped in them that match the Martian atmosphere. So we're pretty sure that they are pieces of Mars that have arrived here on Earth. So we've got some Martian meteorites. We've got some samples of Mars here already. Maybe we should just check out whether any of those have signs of life on them. We are doing that. Scientists have done that. Many of these meteorites turned up in Antarctica. Scientists go there almost every year to search for more meteorites, hoping to find more treasures from planets like Mars. And in 1984, an especially interesting meteorite was discovered. It's called ALH 84001. It's the first Martian meteorite that was picked up in Allen Hills, Antarctica, in 1984. Now, recent research shows that this is a very old rock. It crystallized from molten rock over 4 billion years ago, maybe part of the original crust of Mars. And in 1996, scientists held a big press conference in Washington, D.C., announcing that they had found, well, whatever that is. They concluded that it could be fossilized bacteria that would have lived on Mars those billions of years ago. Maybe in a time when Mars was a little warmer and had liquid water, unlike today. So maybe some form of life had taken hold on Mars. In ancient times, then something hit Mars, blasted a bit of rock that had some microbes on it up into space, and well, that's what we're left with when the meteorite gets to Earth. So that was a pretty interesting announcement. It got a lot of attention. Carl Sagan, who unfortunately would pass away a few months after this discovery, he's certainly a big proponent of life elsewhere in the universe. He said, if this discovery is confirmed, it will surely be, or it will be a turning point in human history. And then you had even a statement from U.S. President at the time, Bill Clinton, who said also, if the discovery is confirmed, it'll be one of the most stunning insights into our universe that science has ever uncovered. And it certainly would have been. Both of those people were right to hedge their bets just a little bit. there was a little disagreement in the scientific world right away. These features were so small. They were much smaller than all the bacteria that we knew existed on Earth. So it'd be kind of strange if the first example we find on Mars is such unusual life. In 1998, another team followed up on the research and found that actually a lot of these were too small to contain all the molecules needed for even the simplest form of metabolism. So may not have been life in the first place. Another interesting line of evidence had to do with the way magnetic minerals were lined up in these supposed fossils, and that was actually debunked by the brother of the lead scientist, who had concluded that it was fossils. They both worked at NASA. Their offices were just down the hall from each other, and probably caused some awkward Thanksgiving dinner conversations. And now, 14 years later, the supposed fossils in, 24 years later, the supposed fossils in ALH 84001 have largely faded from memory. And we don't think that we've actually found fossils on Mars, at least not yet. Maybe Perseverance will turn something up. This search for life on Mars, searching for Martians, has always been kind of a tricky business. During an episode of this series in late July, I joked that Martians, though, had still given us the technology we needed to explore Mars. So we need to go investigate this up in Conspiracy Corner. Now, that story went that when astronomers were trying to map Mars in the early days of the telescope, they sometimes saw things that turned out not to be there. You can go back to the Italian astronomer Giovanni Schiaparelli. He made maps of Mars and included some straight lines that appeared to cross the face of the planet. He named them canali, which is simply the Italian word for channel. Totally natural feature. But when that word hit the ears of at least one American astronomer, Percival Lowell, he jumped to the conclusion that these canali were actually canals. Canals are artificial constructions that here on Earth we humans use to move water around. So this ignited Percival Lowell's imagination, and he imagined Mars as this abode for life. That's the title of a book he wrote on the subject. He imagined vast Martian cities with a population that was using these canals to move water from the poles to their population centers to keep their civilization thriving. He mapped out the surface of Mars as well, and started naming the cities and the canals. And the idea of Martians really took hold in popular culture as well. There are countless examples of science fiction books and stories that I could give you right now that would describe Martian societies or Martians invading the Earth, though perhaps the best example would be H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds. I had to choose this example because this is a book that was read by one Robert Goddard when he was young, and it inspired a lifelong career in space exploration. Over 100 years ago, when that was not a career that anybody had. Robert Goddard invented the liquid fuel rocket. He launched the very first one in 1926, continued his research. His research spread around the world, and in a rather roundabout manner, all of the rockets that were used to send spacecraft to Mars, and really just about every rocket that has ever gone into space has actually been a liquid fuel rocket that has used elements of Robert Goddard's designs. So it's fake Martians that inspired real advances here on Earth, but there is a real connection between this belief in life on Mars and our exploration of Mars. But where did that belief really come from in the first place? How did astronomers get fooled the first time around? Well, you've got to remember that a couple hundred years ago, telescopes weren't quite as good as they are today, and all these astronomers were relying on their own eyes, looking through the eyepiece of their telescopes. They were all on the surface of the Earth, so they had to deal with the turbulence in Earth's atmosphere that blurred their telescopic images. These are real pictures taken with a rather large telescope here on Earth, but they were the first ones the last ones taken before our first spacecraft got there. And even in those real pictures as we drift away from the artificial Mars here in Digistar. You can see that those straight canals that were on the maps that folks like Schiaparelli and Lowell made kind of fading away, and it's kind of hard to tell those pictures apart. Even real photographs taken in the early 1900s can neither confirm nor refute the existence of those canals on Mars. So that's why it remained such a tough question to answer. We simply didn't have the technology to confirm whether there were Martians until our spacecraft got there in the 1960s. So even though there are no vast cities, no vast intelligent civilizations on Mars, we are still looking for signs of ancient life there, and may still find it someday. Now, if you want to see Mars for yourself, it's actually a great time of year to do it. So let's take a short break from searching for life to take a quick glance at the nighttime sky. I've got you set up here in Richmond, and this is what the sky will look like a little later on tonight. If you happen to go out around midnight, you'll be able to see the things I'm about to show you. I've got you facing to the south here on the small screen. Since we're not under the giant dome here at the museum, we've got to kind of look around, but you've got to actually look around at the nighttime sky outdoors as well. So let's go from facing south to more to the southeast. We're going to turn to the left here just a little bit. Now, if you're out around midnight these days and you look pretty high in the sky at midnight, or a little lower in the sky, a little earlier in the evening, whoops, turn us back over to the southeast there, we will be able to see Mars. Now, it'll be especially bright in the sky because Earth is getting pretty close to it in our orbit around the sun right now. This close approach between Earth and Mars is why we launched our spacecraft to Mars when we did. Now, it may not stand out too much on your screen, but let me help you out. It should be the brightest thing on the screen right now. It'll be the brightest thing in the southeastern sky at midnight tonight. Let's see, it looks like that dot right there. So that's Mars. Just to your eye, it'll look kind of like a really bright star. As we talked about a few weeks ago, the biggest difference will be both its brightness and the fact that it will not appear to twinkle in the sky. But if you have access to decent binoculars or maybe a little telescope, you can observe it the way Schiaparelli, Lowell, and many others have since. See if you can see the canals for yourself. I'm going to zoom way in here and give us a little sample of what that might look like. Now this view is going to be much clearer than you would be able to see out in the real world because we're using software here. We don't actually have to deal with the blurring effects of Earth's atmosphere. But you know, hey, on my screen, I can just make out a couple of dark patches. There are some color variations across the surface of Mars. I'm not sure I could claim any canals there on that little red dot, though. So I'll let you investigate that for yourself. Now, though, I want to tell you, I got a couple more stories about searching for life on other worlds. So let's look a little closer to home, even closer than Venus, closer than Mars. We're also going to look a little bit farther back in history. And this is one where I want to open with a disclaimer. This was not a true scientific publication. No scientists were actually involved in this story, as far as I know. This one is a hoax, but it caught on a lot like the stories of Martians and perhaps life on Venus already have. This involves our moon. Now, in a couple of weeks, if you go outside, we'll have a full moon, and well, the moon will actually be pretty close to Mars in the sky. So that should help you identify Mars if you're unable to find it right now. So 2 weeks, full moon, the moon will be right next to Mars. And we're going to zoom in on that now and talk about a story that involves our moon as well as the sun. Not the star at the center of the solar system, though, the sun that existed as a daily newspaper in New York City starting in 1833. Now, the sun has a few claims to fame. You may have heard of a few of these. A series of articles they wrote about crime in New York City inspired the 1954 movie On the Waterfront. The Sun employed the editorial cartoonist Rube Goldberg of Rube Goldberg Machine fame. He worked there for a decade. And The Sun was responsible for the most reprinted English language newspaper editorial ever. Is there a Santa Claus? The answer, of course, being yes, Virginia. There is a Santa Claus. And speaking of Virginia, for a local connection here in Richmond, they also ran a story that was written by Edgar Allan Poe. Now, they ran it as factual, and it described an imagined Atlantic crossing by a hot air balloonist. They had to retract that 2 days later. That's called the balloon hoax, but I brought you to the moon to talk about the great moon hoax of 1835. So quite a long time ago, almost 200 years. In a series of articles published in The Sun, they described discoveries supposedly made by the astronomer John Herschel. He was one of the most famous astronomers around in those days. He was the son of equally, or probably more famous, William Herschel, who, spoiler alert, is going to come up a little bit later in this show. Now, John Herschel was on an expedition to South Africa in those years, and he was making important astronomical observations, but it didn't involve what the Sun described. What the Sun described was John Herschel observing the moon and finding life on the moon. They described white sand beaches, forests full of trees, small bison-like animals, a giant beaver that walked on 2 legs and carried its young around in their arms, a lot like humans do. There were examples of zebra-like creatures, birds, deer, all kinds of interesting animals found on the moon if you just zoomed in using a giant telescope, which I can't actually do that in Digistar. It was a pretty fantastic story, and it got the Sun a lot of attention, probably increased their circulation quite a lot, especially when people got to the part about the man bats. I'm sorry, that just took my breath away. That's right, man bats. These are creatures looked a lot like humans, but had bat-like wings that allowed them to fly around on the moon. Yeah, man bats don't exist. Okay, but there were reasons to be skeptical even before you got to that part of the story. The Sun also claimed that John Herschel had solved all the mathematical problems plaguing astronomers. And that certainly wasn't true. They also claimed that he had found planets outside of the solar system. As it turns out, Neptune hadn't been discovered yet because astronomers had not solved oddities in the motion of Uranus around the Sun. So astronomers weren't done with our solar system, let alone finding planets in other solar systems. The Sun also claimed that John Herschel had constructed a telescope lens 6 times larger than any other telescope lens already in existence at the time. So careful readers should have already been skeptical of the stories, but it's still an interesting example because it gives us a little bit of insight into the way everyone was thinking in those days. Science, astronomy in particular, was advancing at a relatively rapid pace at that time, and the public was generally pretty engaged with scientific advancements. So it's okay to get excited about big discoveries. Science can do some amazing things, but remember that new advances like finding life on another world, especially flying man bats, is not something that is usually going to be done by one person answering all of the questions and making amazing new inventions all by themselves. So an important lesson from history for us there, which just about brings me to the end, except for one little thing. We want to look for life on Mars and Venus, which is great. And people were willing to read about lunar man bats 200 years ago because, well, those are places that are nearby. And in the case of Mars, where there used to be liquid water on the surface, we can imagine them being a bit more like Earth and maybe having life as we know it. But there's another bigger idea that goes back even farther. We can trace it back to the ancient Greeks. Some of them suggested that, well, maybe life could take place on all of the worlds, so maybe even undiscovered worlds around other stars. It's something called cosmic pluralism, or the plurality of worlds. It perhaps reached its peak or its low point, depending on how you want to look at it, in the Enlightenment, when astronomers like John Herschel's father, William Herschel, thought of some pretty interesting places that life might exist. Thing that life could be anywhere is kind of the ultimate case of wanting to believe in aliens. And well, William Herschel decided that maybe there was life on the sun. Now, I know what you think. This is a star. Its surface is thousands of degrees. There's no way anything could live on the sun, right? Almost everyone would agree with you, but not William Herschel. He suggested, no, there's just a very thick, luminous atmosphere, but there are these dark spots, and this is just where we are seeing down through the atmosphere. Those are mountains or perhaps rocky terrain that creatures could live on. I'm sure there's some fascinating ways that these creatures avoid being incinerated by the atmosphere above them. That wasn't true. But I'm pretty sure I know what kind of posters William Herschel had on his observatory walls. Yeah. Okay. So maybe we shouldn't go to such extremes to find life elsewhere in the solar system. But if maybe astronomers can propose that there's life on the sun and not be completely laughed out of the room, we shouldn't turn down the idea of maybe there being life at a place like Venus. It's not the most friendly world today. I wouldn't want to live there. But again, this idea of life on Venus is not a new one. And it does go back to another name I've mentioned today, Carl Sagan. He's a widely revered astronomer, and he may have been one of the first to seriously talk about how life could exist on Venus. And he did describe a way that bacteria could exist in the clouds of Venus way back in 1967. And it also gives us another lesson from Venus. I think that early in the history of the solar system, Venus was much more like the Earth. It may have had a thinner atmosphere than it does today. Temperatures may have been a little more comfortable. Probably had liquid water all over its surface as well. So maybe life took hold billions of years ago on Venus, but then things started to change. Global upheaval of the surface, widespread volcanism changed the chemistry of its atmosphere and gave us the Venus that we see today. But if life had existed in those ancient times, perhaps the changes on Venus were slow enough that life was able to adapt to its changing climate. And perhaps microbes did take to life in the air, where they could potentially survive. If you go back and you watch Carl Sagan miniseries Cosmos, in the second episode, he describes perhaps an even more fantastic story of creatures living in a gas giant's atmosphere, like you might find at Jupiter. So watch that story. That's pretty interesting. Then watch the rest of the series. That's pretty good. And then know that Sagan was also talking about finding life exactly where we now have hints of biological processes going on. Again, haven't found the life just yet, but it's an interesting hint that Venus is worth taking a closer look at. But also keep these cautionary tales in mind. Wait for some confirmation of the discovery at Venus. Another thing that Carl Sagan would remind us is that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. We may not be there quite yet with Venus, but it's worth taking a closer look at. And as he said about that Martian meteorite, if the results are verified, it's a turning point in human history. So while we wait for that potential, but maybe not turning point, I'm going to sign off for the week. We'll have a lot more to share with you next week, though. You can tune in again next Thursday right here on Facebook, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. If you want to go back and watch previous episodes, once again, those are archived here in our video section on Facebook. Or get them up on YouTube as well. You can take a look there. If you have any questions about anything that appeared in this week's show, or other random questions about anything in the universe, I'm happy to tackle those. Just leave them in the comments section here under this video, and we'll take a look. Speaking of questions, looks like one has just come in. Let me read that. The term life refers to microbes, right? Well, in this case, on Venus, the life that would exist and would be responsible for creating this phosphine would be microscopic life. It would be like what's called anaerobic bacteria that lives here on Earth. So there must be some kind of analog to that on Venus, if that is what is creating the phosphine gas. Let's see. Although there may be building blocks of life, the temperature on Venus is too hot to support life as we know it, right? Well, yes, at the surface, temperatures are much too hot to allow life as we know it. You're pushing almost 900 degrees Fahrenheit. But again, we're talking up in the atmosphere, and just like as you go up in the atmosphere here on Earth and temperatures go down, the same thing happens on Venus. You go up in the atmosphere on Venus, temperatures go down. Now, the level they found this gas is the temperatures are still a little warmer than we're used to here on Earth. Off the top of my head, I believe it would still be around 120, 140 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that. So still pretty warm. But again, that's not too unusual for microbes here on Earth. We find microbes in hot springs, things like that, where temperatures are pretty high. So it's definitely not out of the realm of possibility. The very acidic environment would be my number one concern, with the explanation being life. And let's see, one more section to the question. Is it possible to have life outside of similar temps to those on Earth? Well, we don't know. We've only found life here on Earth, so we can only talk about the range of temperatures here on Earth. So the atmosphere of Venus, that's about the upper range of where we found life here on Earth. So we're pushing the limits of what might be possible or could easily be conceived of by scientists. We've probably got some new things to explain, and that's maybe the most exciting thing about this discovery for me. Whether it's life or not, something that we don't have an explanation for yet is happening at Venus. The team did their best to explain this gas in other ways. Could it be made by that volcanic activity that we know has happened on Venus and may still be happening today? Could it be explained by some kind of plate tectonics that, although we don't think it exists on Venus, maybe it does, and this gas is a sign? Could it be the result of some interaction with asteroids or little meteoroids that are entering Venus's atmosphere? Could it just be lightning in the atmosphere, the energy from that lightning kicking off some chemical reactions that create the phosphine? None of those would make the amount of gas that they detected, so there's still some other explanation out there. So those questions came in from Jamie. Thanks for that, Jamie. And again, if you have any other questions, feel free to keep those coming. I think I will sign off for today, though. So leave those down in the comments, though, and I can return to them in a future episode. So thanks for tuning in today. I'll be back next week. Go outside, try and see Mars for yourself tonight, and I'll be back next Thursday with more exciting things about the universe. Hope to see you again. Until then, stay safe.